It has been a little over a year since President Trump was elected in his second term of office. The key part of the campaign and mandate was to secure the border and to reverse the disastrous open border policies of the Biden administration. Now, as we see, President Trump is delivering on that campaign promise by implementing the very policies that the American people voted for, not to mention the fact that these policies and these laws were passed by Congress and signed into law, and merely our law enforcement agencies are merely enforcing laws that Congress itself has passed. The president's doing this by securing the U.S.-Mexican border to prevent more illegal aliens from coming into the country and also removing illegal aliens who entered our country during President Biden's open border disaster. Aggressive immigration enforcement is not unprecedented. President Obama, who has been praised by the left for unifying the country, deported more than 2.5 million illegal immigrants, earning him the title Deporter-in-Chief. Democrats seem to have forgotten this data point, but I'm happy to remind them. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the progressive left in the Democratic Party these days has lost its mind in the face of enforcement of current immigration laws, again, which the American people voted for and Congress has passed. They haven't hesitated to spread misinformation and vilify the very men and women in law enforcement who are enforcing our immigration laws. But these groups have not stopped at spreading lies. They're actually inciting violent mobs to impede the enforcement of laws that Congress has passed. Inciting mob violence against any law enforcement officer is unacceptable, and those who do so have to be held accountable. For this reason, I'm holding a hearing as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration and Border Security to examine these unfounded attacks on our law enforcement agents. In particular, we'll consider what is unfolding in America's so-called sanctuary cities. Under President Biden, millions of unvetted illegal immigrants entered our country across the U.S.-Mexico border. These included criminal aliens, violent gang members, including MS-13 and Tren de Aragua, and individuals on the terror watch list. They came not just from Mexico or Central America, but from literally every corner of the world. And where did they go after they crossed the border? These individuals found refuge primarily in America's sanctuary cities, places like Los Angeles, Portland, and Chicago. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, there are currently 12 sanctuary states and more than 200 sanctuary cities in the United States. Many of these states and communities have passed laws that actually prevent local police officers from cooperating with federal law enforcement officers employed by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This means that in some instances, these local law enforcement officers can't share information about detained or incarcerated aliens or honor DHS, Department of Homeland Security, detainers placed on criminal aliens. So ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, has no alternative but to conduct raids on various sites to detain illegal aliens and then see that they are removed from the country. So just to explain that a minute, when an illegal alien is arrested and placed in a local jail, if local authorities are allowed to and do in fact cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that transfer from the local jail to the immigration officials can occur in the jail. And ICE doesn't need to conduct dangerous raids in our communities in these sanctuary cities. But in the sanctuary cities, that's not possible. They have no alternative since there's no cooperation at the local level. So in those jurisdictions, in the so-called sanctuary cities, criminal aliens are released back into their communities and inevitably reoffend. That means commit other crimes rather than being detained by the Department of Homeland Security and allowing them to take custody. This practice not only defies common sense, it makes the role of immigration enforcement officers more difficult and in the end more painful for each of these communities. I would hope at least that some of my colleagues across the aisle would agree that criminal aliens should be detained and deported. I'm not sure they would agree with that. It seems by their conduct and by their votes, they are suggesting that illegal aliens have just as much right to be in the United States as you and me. So once these criminals are picked up off the streets and detained in jails, why wouldn't we want federal law enforcement officers with Immigration and Customs Enforcement to be able to accept them transferred from the jail authorities to ICE custody and then deported? Any alien who has already shown a complete disregard for U.S. law should not be allowed to stay in the United States. Sanctuary cities instead have the practice of actually releasing these very people, sometimes dangerous people, who we all know should be first in line for deportation. ICE would not have to go into communities and find criminal aliens if elected officials and local governments would simply cooperate with federal law enforcement authorities. These cities could have facilitated enforcement the easy way, but instead chose the hard way. And instead of reporting this unfortunate reality, and truthfully, mainstream media outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and ABC have ignored the real harm that these criminal aliens have caused in these communities and instead directed their ire toward law enforcement. You know, this is sort of a manifestation of what used to be called the defund police movement, which has made so many communities in our states and nation unsafe. Because ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which are employed by the Department of Homeland Security, are federal law enforcement officials. And basically, when the mainstream media accuses them of what, in essence, is just doing their job, they are suggesting that the laws should not be enforced and that the fault, if there is fault, lies with the federal law enforcement officers that are simply doing their job as mandated by Congress. The mainstream media and Democratic elected officials have used incendiary rhetoric to fan the flames of public protests that are anything but, quote, mostly peaceful. The result has been widespread assault on our law enforcement officers. Protesters and criminal aliens have physically attacked them in some instances. They've rammed officers with vehicles, thrown tear gas, smoke grenades, rocks, and bottles, and even punched and shot at these law enforcement officers for simply doing their job. Left-wing protesters have laid down in the street in an attempt to prevent vehicles belonging to law enforcement from entering or leaving detention facilities, and even slashed government vehicle tires, all in an effort to prevent ICE and Customs and Border Protection from doing their job. Officers have been pepper sprayed, choked, punched, and injured to the point of hospitalization in some cases. These individuals, who seem to be celebrated and certainly given a lot of publicity in the mainstream media as if they were in the right, these groups have prevented the arrest and removal of criminals, documented criminals, including facilitating the escape, in one case, of a convicted child rapist who is now out there somewhere in the community at large. The Democratic Party claims to be the party of the people. But when it comes to protecting the American people from violent gangs like Tren de Aragua, pedophiles and rapists, they simply look the other way or claim that the fault lies with law enforcement, not people who've already violated our laws. Progressive activists have done everything they can imagine to impede immigration enforcement officers from carrying out their duty, including doxing them, putting their personal information on the web, and even making death threats. The left-wing media has been intent on giving this behavior a pass, but Senate Republicans will not give them a pass. So I encourage all of my colleagues and all my constituents back home in Texas to tune in to the hearing that we intend to have this afternoon in the Senate Judiciary Committee. In this hearing, we'll hear testimony from Sheriff Boyd, who will give an update on Texas's cooperation with immigration enforcement and how it protects their officers and local communities. Danielle Carter Walker will offer insight into how left-wing policies are failing Chicago residents and other Americans living in sanctuary cities. And Mia Cathell, an investigative journalist from the Washington Examiner, will offer a journalist perspective on how left-wing groups are funding these protests against ICE. While the mainstream media apparently will stop at nothing to spread lies and vilify the very people who've sworn to uphold our laws, my Republican colleagues and I are not afraid to push back in order to let the American people know the truth. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.